Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me this week is Marion Mariathasan, CEO of Simplifia. Thank you very much for joining me today, Marion.
Thanks for having me on, David.
Before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. Marion, I always like to start with a little bit of background just to get to know the person a little bit. So what was it that brought you to the cannabis industry?
Oh, it's a long route. So I come from the technology space by way of education and just a corporate background. But I owned a tequila company prior to starting in the cannabis industry. I sold that in 2015 and was looking for kind of the next big thing, I suppose. And ran into a few folks over at Vicente Cedarburg, some of the founding partners. And they were talking about the cannabis industry and kind of the problems that it was going to face and was facing at that point in regards to operational compliance. And so using my tech background that I've started and sold a bunch of tech companies prior to the tequila company, thought, hey, I think this is a great opportunity. And, you don't get a chance to be at the forefront of a new industry too often. So started looking into it, and here we are, almost 7 years later.
So education, were you a teacher?
No. So I went to University of Kansas. So grew up in Kansas, originally from a little island called Sri Lanka. But I was an architecture and computer science major with a minor in business management. But I have done a lot of speaking engagements on entrepreneurship at universities. So, but I'm not a professor or.
Understood. So how did you go from the tech sector to tequila?
Yeah, it's a funny one. So my family started doing real estate development down in the Yucatan, so Playa del Carmen, Tulum in Mexico, about 25 some years ago, when there were small fishing towns. And my uncle, who lives down there full time, introduces me to this family that had been making tequila. Because they're like, I love startups, I love trying to solve problems. And next thing you know, we ended up getting involved with that company. They, back in the early 2000s, I guess it's like 2006, 2007, tequila wasn't such a hot commodity as it is now, right? It was, I think most people's idea of tequila is like some whistle blowing and a bad tequila going down your throat. And tequila, of course, now has become extremely popular, but this family had a great product, but they wanted to really get into the US. And so we helped them do that. We rebranded the product, brought it into the US, got it into about 28 different states. And then, we had a chance to sell it. And so we did.
Okay. Did you like the tequila?
I did. Yeah. So as a matter of fact, even now, I'm a weekend drinker, as my friends and family joke, but when I drink, it's only tequila.
Okay. Do you, what is the brand?
Yeah, it was called Demetrio.
Okay.
Demetrio tequila. Yeah, it's a small batch high-end tequila.
Yeah, I'll check it out. Just because it is, tequila's more of a rare special occasion circumstance for me. But that's because I've only dabbled in the high-end tequila. I've only had the Drek that, you took as shots in your youth that has just burned me.
Yes. Yeah, no, I mean, it's certainly a very refined drink now, and I think it's become extremely popular, right? Including mezcal. But back in the day, it was a little easier. I think there's a lot of SKUs out there now, and there's a lot of different brands and a lot of celebrities behind it. But back in 2006, 2008, there weren't so many, so it was a little easier for us to cut through the noise and get out there.
So working with a small family to grow and eventually sell their tequila brands, what similarities did you see when you moved into the cannabis business in terms of it being sort of a startup?
Yeah, so I think, the parallels from alcohol to cannabis is that, alcohol is still a very highly regulated industry, right? Obviously, we've come far from, the days of prohibition, but it's still regulated. And so cannabis, to me, what I really like, I think the parallels there is that vices, right? It's whether times are good or bad, I think, these vices kind of keep society kind of moving along, whether you're, using it for medical reasons, or alcohol, obviously not so much for medical, but in terms of cannabis, that's the case. But I think that's probably the initial parallel. But in terms of cannabis, for me, it was, I think, here's this natural plant that's been demonized, if you will, for too long. And, I certainly buy into the medical benefits of cannabis, as well as I think, people should be able to, use it for a recreational purpose if they're using it appropriately. Right. And so, what I really liked about the industry at that time was that it wasn't just going to be a Colorado, California, Washington type movement, and we all knew that more states were going to come on, and then ultimately it was going to be global. And because it's going to be highly regulated, how does one create a platform that helps all these operators stay compliant to all these moving regulations and just streamlines all this stuff, right? And so it was a kind of a natural, fun progression for me, and so here I am.
When was it? When did you go through the transformation where cannabis was, had medical benefits, or have you always felt that way throughout your life?
Well, I've always felt that throughout my life, because Sri Lanka, it's very Ayurvedic. They use cannabis for Ayurvedic purposes for medical reasons. Even though it's highly regulated, people have been using it for centuries, right? And so even though I was only 8 when I left Sri Lanka, I have a very strong, base and root there. Even now, I actually have a software dev company that it's out of Sri Lanka, and so I'm there a couple of times a year. And so when I saw that, cannabis was actually starting to make some sort of a progression here, it was just, I'm like, oh my gosh, like we've been using it for centuries. And as a matter of fact, not just in Sri Lanka, globally, right? People have been using cannabis for medical purposes for, a long time. And so I felt like this was the right time, and so jumped on board.
Talking about the regulatory aspect of the cannabis industry, when did the emergence happen of reg tech in all industries, and is cannabis still sort of lagging behind where other industries are in terms of using this type of technology?
Well, I think, it's just reg tech is also pretty similar to fintech, right? I mean, whenever you have a new industry coming along, I think, people are always looking for ways to create efficiency, right? And reduce time and costs and manpower, et cetera. And so, we as Simplify, we've been around since 2016. Now, granted, we built the software from ground up, particularly for the cannabis industry. And so it took us some time, right? Because things are changing. Back then, a multi-state operator wasn't really even a term that we were using as much, right? Because they were all smaller operators. And so I think to answer your question, it's pretty natural, I think, for technology to come along. And obviously in other industries, there's been more time to refine and hone in on, how to build a RegTech product. But I think, speaking only for Simplify, I think over the last 6.5 years, we've certainly done that ourselves, and which is why our clients range from the largest MSOs all the way down to, single license operators. So I think it does fill a need for every industry.
Talking about reg tech and fintech, all these new tools are built to make life easier, right, for business owners. What do they do with their time? Does it wind up actually, are these business owners seeing an ROI or time savings or a manpower savings? How is that sort of realized? And is it making life easier on the owners?
I would think so, right? So we get a lot of feedback, and we are a company that continuously asks for feedback, right? Whether it's our longest standing client or our newest client, because that's how we improve our product. And the feedback over the last 6 years or so has been, hey, this does help create more efficiency, meaning something that takes an employee to walk around, do an audit with a piece of paper and a clipboard. Now you're doing it with a tablet or a mobile app or a web app. And instead of now going through and doing that audit and having a bunch of paperwork in a filing cabinet, it's all stored securely in the cloud. If a auditor or a regulator were to walk in, you just pull out this information, right? When I say pull it out, it's either they can have a hard print audit report, or they can just pull up the Simplifier profile, go into that and show their historical records of all the audits they've done, when they've done it, who did it, the time, date, all these things that really help them streamline stuff, right? That's not just an audit in terms of regulations for your license type or where your business is, but it's also, we provide standard operating procedures. We have license tracking. We'll tell you when applications are due. I mean, the system is designed to tell you literally everything that you need to do as an operator based on the state that you're in, the types of licenses you have. And so, we have great feel good, feedback that, I remember about a year and a half ago, an operator out of California reached out and said, oh my gosh, an enforcement officer walked in and we pulled out our Simplify audit report and gave it to them. And but at this point, most even regulators know of Simplify. So, that kind of ratchets down the intensity, if you will, of them looking around. But, he did say they did, the auditor or the enforcement officer found an issue. And we were like, oh my gosh, like, did we slip up here? And of course, he's like, no, the audit report actually, flagged this issue. We just didn't get around to, resolving it. And so they shared that with the enforcement officer, and, they didn't get fined or anything. They came back to make sure that it was done. And so that's, a case of a happy story, right? So whether you're a Cureleaf that has a big compliance team, or you're a small operator, I think that's what Simplify brings to the table, is that it creates so much more efficiency. Because, if you're an operator that's running a massive operation, your compliance team still has to stay on top of all those ever-changing regs, right? And understanding what those regs are. And so that's what Simplify brings, is we do all that heavy lifting for them, so that essentially you're just using this tool to stay on top of it. Sorry, that's a long-winded answer.
No, it wasn't. It was long-winded, but it was, I think it was important. One thing that I've always been impressed with Simplify on is how you guys remain at the foreground of what's happening in the industry, just because you've invested resources on kind of knowing what's going on in the industry or what's coming, kind of before like regulations come down.
Yeah, we've been very lucky. And, when we were invited last year to Senator Sanders Jr.'s office in New York, and their whole thing was, you guys have had a front row seat to all these new states launching, because you're ingesting all these regs and you're watching what's going on. And they wanted to essentially pick our brain around, what's working, what's not in other states. Similarly, we've been approached by the Fiji Islands, Papua New Guinea, even Sri Lanka, that's trying to legalize cannabis. I had conversations in Romania, all because we have had that front row seat. And, if there's one thing that we focus heavily on, and those are the regulations, right? And so everyone wants to know what we think, what's best practices. And so it, after having spent our time in the trenches, it's kind of nice to be, called on for guidance or help or advice.
So what's working and what's not?
That's a loaded question, David. I think, I think if I were to just say it at a high level, I mean, every state, obviously, Colorado, at least from a recreational, Colorado, Washington, California, these were kind of the older states. And I think, when people ask us, we always say, well, look at what's working for other states, right? And we can certainly give you some guidance on that and what's not working, and create your, program around it. And some people still will deviate in their own kind of ways, and others will really spend time trying to understand what works. And I don't want to really say one state's better than the other or not. I mean, I think, from our perspective, we certainly see some that are maybe doing it better. But, we'll be, politically correct here and avoid that situation. However, I think, the more people or new states, when government's really looking to legalize or put a, framework around legalization, now you have 30 some states that are legal in one form or the other. Really look at what the others are doing, talk to companies like us, talk to other regulators, talk to companies, see what's going to be best for that state. I think that's the easiest way to say it.
When regulators decide to deviate from your advice, how do you respond, and why do you think they go in a different direction?
Yeah, I don't. And this also, I need to be careful how I say it. I think oftentimes, not oftentimes, sometimes, you get a fresh set of eyes that come into the industry, and I think they view it as, hey, okay, this is what's been happening, but I think we could do it this way and it'll be better. Um, and that's, I think, a fair way to approach it. If it were me that was launching a new state, I would probably rely more on what's worked and what's not. And to us, it's end of the day, we're not running the state. We're not dealing with all that they deal with. And so all we could do is just kind of give our advice and be there to support after the fact. And that's worked in some instances and not so much in others, and that's okay.
When it comes to emerging technology, I'm really interested in AI and how it's going to play, particularly on the compliance side. When it comes into compliance and documentation, are you employing any sort of AI when it comes to like generating reports, anything like that?
Yeah, so we actually have a R&D team that's been pretty heavily playing around with AI and how we could utilize it for the industry. And I think while AI certainly can play a role down the road, right now our feeling, David, is that there's still too much risks involved for us as a compliance company to utilize it without human interaction. And I'll kind of expand on that. So because so many operators in the industry rely on us, to make sure that, we provide timely but efficient and clear, guidance on, everything operationally compliance related. And we've got some technology that we have played around with. We're like, oh, we can maybe automate this. And there wasn't enough comfort level there for us to purely take out the human side of it, right? Because Simplify is primarily made up of lawyers and policy folks and engineers. Probably the least sexiest company in the industry, but
I was gonna say the parties have got to be bangers.
Yeah, but I think, but we serve a purpose, and I think we're just not comfortable enough yet to employ AI to take over some of these things now. Who knows down the road? I think there's certainly a place, but not yet for us.
Is part of the issue with AI not necessarily the subjectivity, but the inability to discern good information from bad information when...
Yes, right. I mean, so AI is, ultimately it's as smart as the information that it has, right? That it's presented. And, I think because it's been around for a while, it's still relatively new. From a liability standpoint, like, we're all about liability, right? Not only for the operators, but like, we can't put out any bad information if it gets, our clients in trouble. And so that's the challenge, right? Because with AI, it is all based on the information that it's fed over time, and it gets smarter. We just are not comfortable just yet.
Understood. In April, you launched the Risk Mitigation Alliance. How did that come together, and how has it been ever since the alliance launched a few months ago?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, David. So we're super excited about this, right? So RMA, Risk Mitigation Alliance, was something that we, in collaboration with some of the bigger names and the insurance names in the industry, came to, put this thing together. So essentially, insurance carriers and brokers, right? They're taking cannabis, whether we like it or not, is still a very high risk industry, right? In the way most people perceive it. And insurance obviously is very risk averse. And they're like, how can we work with Simplify as the operational compliance tool to see if we can reduce kind of the risk levels of these operators? And So, they had to look under the hood of Simplify, and they're like, is this tool, comprehensive enough to where if an operator is using it, that we can actually derive some assumptions. And that is that if you use this tool, we can assume that many other areas of their business is much more buttoned up. And that's what they're looking at, right? From an underwriting perspective. And fortunately, I think, Simplify did pass that litmus test to where it was like, wow, okay, because it is so detail oriented. And because if an operator is using it on an ongoing basis, insurance is like, we can actually, lower the premiums potentially, again, based on, there's so many different factors, obviously, that an insurance company looks at. But from an operational compliance perspective, that like we actually can deem the risk profile to be lowered. And so they were wanting to subsidize, a big portion of Simplify as a way to encourage the use of this tool. And so that's what Risk Mitigation Alliance came up with, is that if you're using Simplify and you're working with these big insurance partners that are part of RMA, then 70% of Simplify will be subsidized for that operator, which is a significant amount, actually, 70%. All because it lowers the risk profile not only for that operator and the insurance company that's providing coverage, but the idea is that the better compliant and governance our industry becomes, the better it is for the industry as a whole, for everyone else that you work with, and ultimately for the consumers. And so that's where we started. And just a week and a half ago, we announced that Risk Mitigation Alliance is expanding. So banks, POS companies, law firms, these are all seasoned players that want to also provide some sort of value and relief for the industry. As you know, David, the industry's struggling pretty badly, not just because generally the way the markets are, but I think just the lack of investment dollars in the industry. And so RMA, we decided, has to be highly vetted list of companies that really have a deep expertise in what they do. Unfortunately, as you probably also know, a lot of companies come and go out of this industry, right? It's very different than I think other industries. And so we actually go through the process of vetting every partner that comes in. And then we also ask them to provide some sort of a financial relief or benefit for the operators. And we had two extremely seasoned banks that just joined RMA. We've got Vicente, which is one of the longest running marijuana law firms that also joined. Shield Compliance, which works, it's a fintech company that works with banks. And we've got a lot of other cool conversations going on right now. And so really excited about this, because again, in summary, it's not just the value and the cost savings for the operator. It's also about really, working with the most seasoned and well-known companies in the industry.
Well, it's a crude comparison, but it reminds me of when health insurance companies started giving discounts for people with like a gym membership. And then it had to go beyond like having a gym membership. It was like, well, you have to use it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, right? So I think insurance, even banks, we're having conversations with financial institutions that are, wanting to encourage the use of Simplify. But the difference is, even if you give them a price break and they're not using it, then, no one's really benefiting from it, right? And so I think it's a fine line between saying you have to use it versus we highly recommend you use it. And if you use it, then you're going to get all these incentives. And that seems to be working. I think some of the stuff that we're seeing right now is at least a biannual Simplify audit report. So if your insurance policy is, coming up for renewal, send us right before that renewal your most recent Simplify audit report, and then we'll go ahead and maintain that discounted pricing or preferred pricing or whatever it may be. Same thing with banks, same thing with everyone else, but it's evolving pretty quickly.
Is the on-ramp different with people that come to Simplify via another financial services company or insurance company rather than a company that just comes to you directly? Because it's not, I don't like it's not like it's being forced upon them, but it's, I feel like operators that come to you specifically for compliance help, know exactly what they're looking for, and maybe they're more likely to use it to its fullest extent versus someone that's, urged to do it as a result of some financial incentives.
Yeah, so that's a great question, David. We don't have enough data as of yet because RMA is still fairly new. But what I would say is that, typically someone that comes directly, they're feeling a pain point, right? They're like, oh my gosh, I need this because I can't run my business without it, type of scenario. Versus, someone that's coming in through insurance or banking or another partner, if they're being incentivized, what typically happens with Simplify is, when someone sees a demo of the product or they actually see it in action, we have a 98%-ish conversion rate if we can get them to a demo. And because that's the tricky part, right? Because most of the people can't conceive or conceptualize what exactly this tool does for them until they see it. So one of the first things we do now, if it comes through some sort of a referral through our partners, is to say, why do you think you need it? And then based on those questions, we'll show them the product. And once we show the product, they're like, oh my gosh, like this is going to make my life way easier than what we've been doing. As a matter of fact, we had a demo call with, an extremely large MSO last week. And, probably for over a year and a half, we've been like trying to get their attention to show them what we have. And, they just weren't interested. Then all of a sudden, one of our insurance partners brought them to us, and we provided a demo for all the way to the top. And it was like, oh my gosh, it literally was like an oh my gosh moment for them. And so I'm not sure if I'm answering that directly, but yeah.
No, that did answer my question. And one thing that I'm curious about is the vetting process that you talk about. Just because so many of these companies do kind of come and go in the industry, what does the vetting process look like other than just like, no, you promise you're going to stick around, right?
No, so it's one based on, what the partner is covering. So if it's a law firm or a bank or whatever the case may be, or even insurance, right? How long have you been around? What sort of clientele do you have? Do you have any derogatory marks towards, the services or products you've provided? Sometimes we'll even go into have a look at like financials, like do they have the longevity to stick around? Because I think one of the things we've noticed, David, is that operators will, adopt a product, and then all of a sudden when that company unfortunately goes under or goes away, now they're left with like, oh my gosh, like who do I use now, right? And there's, unfortunately, again, I think that because of the way the industry has been, there's a lot of companies also disappearing overnight. So maybe there aren't as many options. However, it's, you still want to be able to have that ability to pick the most knowledgeable, the best of breed, if you will, and, someone that's going to be around well into the future, so that you're not constantly adapting products or whatnot. So those are the few things that we do to try and vet it.
Well, and not just companies that go away overnight, but I'm also curious about, because we've seen some financial services company in particular, or HR service companies that have just decided to exit cannabis, or they've been forced to exit anything or divest anything that was in their cannabis portfolio. So do members of the RMA have to sign on or like some sort of pledge or promise to remain in the industry?
Yeah. So, we do sign agreements with them. And obviously, if someone goes belly up there, that you can't do much about it. But in terms of, again, even the financial institutions we're speaking to, or even the insurance companies that we're working with, there is that process of, why are you still in this industry? Do you see, any reason that you're bored, or, there's a reason that you might get out of it? And of course, some of these things are unforeseen, right? But I think oftentimes management does have an idea, even if it's coming down the pike. And so we say, if something's about to change, please let us know, because then we need to notify people that work with you. And fortunately, at this point, we have a lot of different entities that fall into different sectors, and so we can move them over to another one if need be. But this is still very new, and we feel very confident about who our partners are so far with RMA, David. So, but let's see how it goes.
Very good. You had mentioned that you work with the smallest of operators all the way through some of the largest MSOs. Do you have one that is your biggest success story in terms of how using compliance software really turned things around for them?
Yeah. Well, there's, I think, a few that we could probably say, but, the folks over at Jushi, they've been an early adopter of Simplifier. They use it through and through just exactly how it was designed. I think, they're an extremely smart team, but I think they also recognize the importance of operational compliance, right? So they provide us a ton of feedback. They use it. They're certainly, one of our many power users, and it's just their back and forth with us and how often, they'll come back with us with questions or feedback just tells us that they use it so well. And and they're one of those clients that constantly like, man, this is just saves us so much time, energy, and money. That's what we want to hear, right? And so it's Jushi's definitely one that comes to mind.
Using it exactly as it's used, or being a power user, I hear about this a lot in the equipment side of things as well, where it's like, if you just use it exactly the way it's intended, it's really going to do a lot better than, just because it seems like, and it's not necessarily special in the cannabis industry, but you get operators that think they can do it better. And, how do you have those conversations with them, with just like sit them down and say, hey, listen, all right, I like what you're doing. You're creative. I like your creative spirit, but please just do this.
Yeah. So, again, I think it's just an educational process, right? I think, for, some of the industry, and they've just been so used to being in the trenches and running their business and trying to stay on top of compliance that I think, or maybe they're just skeptical, right? Can a soft piece of software actually help me, streamline and cut costs and whatever? And so that's where that demo comes into play, David, right? As I said earlier, like, our conversion rate is about 98% if someone actually sees a demo of the product. And so, this is why we ask those questions, like, what do you do for SOPs now? How do you stay on top of that? How do you stay on top of the regulations that are constantly changing, right? How do you track your licenses that are expiring? Then they'll start sharing like, well, I've got this binder for this. I've got this Excel spreadsheet for that. We're like, well, here's what we can do, right? Then you show the product and say, if you use it the way it was intended, it'll save you all this time and energy and money. But, we also have clients that take Simplifier, then they, add their own kind of, Simplifier is super customizable, David. So, with SOPs, we'll say if you're an operator with a medical and recreational license here in Colorado, we'll give them all those SOPs extrapolated from the actual regulations, right? Saying here's how you should do this. But then they can also add in their own kind of customized standard operating procedures about opening and closing their particular store. And so it can be used to also adapt. And people are smart, right? When they see here's the core of this product, then they'll take it, like Jushi is a perfect example. Then they'll add their own kind of intricate details of how they run their business to help them manage their entire business. So it's all about how you want to use it, and do you want to really learn how to use it, right? Because I think we, in the early days, we had customers that signed up and then they would use it like once every 3 months. So.
Yeah. What would you say are the top compliance challenges that operators face today?
Oh, that it's interesting because we have a lot of data on this, right? But I think the top challenge is just time, right? Time and money. Just when I say that, I'm talking about just maintaining their compliance. It's really tough because they either don't have the number of bodies to help do that, or they just don't have the funds to really do that, right? And so that's where, again, Simplify comes into play. It's that whether you have 10 20 people in your compliance team or just one, a tool like Simplify, even if you have multiple locations, it'll do all the work for you, right? As long as you have someone that can actually go and do that physical audit. You didn't ask this question, but I want to point this out, David. The name Simplify comes from the fact that we actually ingest all the regulations. we simplify it down to literally a 12th grade reading level. That's like a benchmark RAT mass to hit. And then we convert them into yes or no questions, right? So whether you're a lawyer or not, you actually can understand the regulations and walk and do an audit in your facility. And I think that's really important. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge, is because they either don't have the expertise in house, right, that understands legalese, or they just don't have the bodies to do it. And that's again where Simplify shines.
Is that the origin of the name? Just like, hey, it looks hard, but we're just gonna simplify it.
Yeah. I mean, we were like trying to, as most startups go, we're sitting around like, here's what we do. Can we come up with a name that describes what we do? And as you probably know, .com, extensions are almost all gone, but we were sitting around like, oh, we're trying to simplify this entire process. So we just stuck an A at the end of it. To be quite honest, that's literally how we came up with that.
It's when you're in the moment, sometimes you're just like, you know what? This is the most genius name that's ever been created.
Yeah. And we've had funny feedback, and if you're like, that's a weird name, or people are like, yeah, well, some people like it because it actually does kind of say what we do. But yeah, I don't know. And as you know, David, there's a lot of green and like a lot of cannabis related names out there, and we're like, let's just do something that kind of explains what we do. So
yeah, no, you didn't want to be like cannabis compliance 420 with a couple of Z's in there.
Yeah, exactly.
You said that you have a lot of data on it. What are some other trends that you're seeing that's coming from that data as a result of all the users that you have on the platform?
Yeah, I think, so we're extremely careful about this data, because we actually don't mine that data, because we want it kept very secure for our users. But, we can see kind of high level trends. And I think, the thing that I would say to the industry is very simple, right? Is that if you make operational compliance a part of your business, it's all about risk mitigation, right? So if you make it as a seamless part of your business, you do your trainings on it, you just, whether it's a quarterly or even a monthly, it just makes everything easier for you if a regulator was to walk in. But secondarily, and even more importantly, it just makes it easier when it's time to sell. As you know, a lot of the bigger companies and people that are coming into the industry, they're very risk averse. And so they want to see what is compliance? It's also about historical data, right? And record of historical data. So Simplify, it's like your iPhone, right? Everything's in the cloud, everything you do, it's stored, it's time stamped. And so when it's time to sell, most people don't want to buy the liability, right? So it's like, hey, here's my Simplify account. You can see everything that we've done. Whenever we've had issues of non-compliance, we've rectified it. So it's good practice, it's good governance, and that's basically what we would tell people when they came to us. Like, what is your data telling you? Well, it's pretty simple. You mitigate your risk by being compliant in many ways.
As new states come online, is it becoming the regulatory process, is it becoming smoother, or is it becoming muddier as new states come online?
So I think, certain states are certainly having much more of a challenge, right? I mean, if you look at California, you look at New York, some of these bigger potential markets, I think the term muddier can be probably utilized there only because it's much more of a complex community that has had existing cannabis practices that should not have been there, if you know what I mean, right? And so trying to settle or like bring those folks into the legal side while trying to make the industry grow is a challenge. I mean, we've seen it, I think, even in California so many years later, right? There's still quite a large gray market out there that's still taking quite a bit of revenue from the legal side. And so I think new states, they come with their own challenges, again, depending on how big of a kind of gray market that exists in their current market. But it's a tough one, and I think we see states trying to address that. But our perspective is you actually can, I think, minimize that gray market, and if for those that want to come to the legal side, you can help them transition over, and that's just by giving them a clear path to getting there, right? Because I think there needs to be more enforcement, right? Because essentially why are we in the state that we're in, right? In terms of the operators, it's highly taxed. They've got all these regulatory things that they have to do, hurdles that they have to stay on top of. But while governments aren't doing too much to enforce and take care of the kind of the gray market or the illicit market. And so that's the challenge I think that new states are going to run into. But I think this is where you can learn from existing states. My 2 cents.
Were you surprised by how New York finally started cracking down on that gray market a little bit?
I actually was not, because we were having those conversations with government and those folks, and they were very serious about it. They're like, hey, we want to give a path to the illicit market to get to the legal side if they want. But if they're not, then they've been saying it for a while, and I think they're doing it so far pretty well. I think they said it, they meant it, and they're going out there doing it. So it's a start.
What states do you predict coming online next?
Oh gosh, that's a good one that probably my RA team will have a better answer for. But it's funny, David, because most people didn't think some of the more conservative states would be legalizing, right? Oklahoma being one, even Missouri. But all of a sudden, you got these states coming on. I think you have Arkansas. I don't know. I mean, we don't have too many more states to go at this point, right? I think, where I grew up, Kansas might be one of the last, but hopefully not. But I think everyone's trying to make some strides. And I think oftentimes when people see government sees the tax revenues coming in, right, and the jobs that it's creating and the benefits, right, because that I think starts to really create some incentives. You certainly, we obviously don't have any interstate rules on cannabis right now, but I can tell you in Colorado, there's certainly people crossing the state line, coming and buying and leaving, right? So how do you minimize all these things? We still have, some work to do as an industry, I think. But look, I think if you asked, 5, 6, 7 years ago, were there going to be 30 states, with some sort of, 30 plus states with some sort of legal form of cannabis, I think most people have been like, I don't think so, but here we are.
What's some of the work that we have to do as an industry?
Well, I think that's really comes down with government and industry folks, right? Because I think if we want to see this further, government has to do its part on, 280E. Perfect example, right? We got to bring some relief to the industry. Safe banking is another one. I mean, I think it's been in the House and Senate like 8 times now and it still hasn't passed. Government needs to play its part. Whether some sort of federal movement happens or not, just safe banking, 280E, I think are great starting points. And I think the industry as a whole just needs to band together and say, like, okay, look, we have 77% of Americans that want this legalized. Why is this not done yet, right? Is it politics as usual in DC, or how can we band together, right? And I think there's great people and great associations trying to do this, but I think more and more of us just need to be louder about it, because clearly it's not being heard in Capitol Hill yet.
Do you see a path towards federal legalization?
I do. I think, I think even if there was some sort of federal legalization piece, I think it's still most likely will be left up to states on how they want to do it, which I think is the right approach. But I think with federal legalization comes the interstate side of it, right? And just, I think more the unfortunate side of that's going to be just more oversight from federal now. So for the operators, now you have local, state, and then you're going to have federal. But I think that's okay, because I think the benefits that come with federal outweighs, what we're seeing right now. But I do think there is that potential, because I think, on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, there's been plenty of people speaking up about it, but no one's just really gone that extra mile to make it happen, and we need something to happen soon, I think.
So which state is most likely to be dead last, Wisconsin or Kansas?
Good question, man. I don't know. I think it's a toss-up, but we can certainly I don't know, because I think the landscape's going to be very different, David, as probably you also think, in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, right? I'm going to be super surprised that if majority or if most of the country doesn't have some sort of form of legalization at that time. I'll be super surprised, and maybe we can have this conversation again and see who won, whether it's Wisconsin.
No, I certainly hope we have another opportunity, because it's been really enlightening speaking with you, and thank you very much for taking the time today.
Thanks, David. And I've really enjoyed this, and great questions. I mean, you made it very easy to talk about this, so thank you.
Before we leave, is there anything else you want to add, or anything in particular that you want to make sure the Cannabis Equipment News audience knows about yourself or Simplify?
No, I think you covered it. We're I think the most important thing is we're here for the long haul to try and help the industry as it grows, and hopefully Risk Mitigation Alliance, we'll see how that evolves. But really, it's designed to help the industry as a whole, and so that's kind of our focus. And we'll keep doing what we can, and hopefully, innovating new products and stuff, and staying involved, because that's the best we could do. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and the industry will be a better place as a result. So thank you again.
Thanks, David.
Before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. Also, subscribe to our daily newsletter to make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. All right. For Marion Mariathasan, CEO of Simplify, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.